Compared to most people around the world, Americans enjoy relatively great freedom to say what they want and to read and watch what content they want. A big reason why is the First Amendment, which limits the United States government's ability to restrict people's speech and media freedom. Having all this freedom means that we get to make choices. But how do we determine which behavior is okay and which behavior is wrong? Determining what is deemed acceptable and what crosses the boundaries requires thoughtful consideration. For example, college students might face dilemmas like, is it okay to lie on a dating app or post an edited photo? Is it okay to break up over text, or is it okay to just skip the breakup and ghost someone? Is it okay to watch a controversial movie? What about pornography? Should they sign this petition or attend that protest? Or is it wrong to remain silent on an issue? We have the right to make any choice on these issues. So how do we decide? What makes us think twice about doing something, or feel bad, or avoid doing it in the first place? That's where norms and ethics come into play. Behaving ethically may seem like a matter of common sense, but true ethical dilemmas often involve complicated situations that can't be easily solved through simple intuition or common sense. Ethics is not the same as feelings either. Though feelings provide important information for our ethical choices, we may feel good even when doing something bad, or we may feel bad when we do something good. Finally, ethics is not a matter of simply following the law. A good legal system incorporates ethical standards, but laws can deviate from what is ethical. For example, a totalitarian regime that tramples on human rights is not ethical. Laws can also be slow to address new problems, which often happens when it comes to governments regulating new technologies such as the internet. There are several different types of ethical reasoning that can help provide us with a moral compass in making judgments. I'm going to briefly summarize 6 major frameworks you should be aware of. The first framework is the utilitarian approach. Philosophers such as John Stuart Mill believe that the best action is the one that provides the most good or does the least harm for everyone affected. That means selecting the action that produces the greatest good and does the least harm for all stakeholders. For example, when a journalist argues that publishing a story benefits his readers more than it harms the subject of the story, they are using utilitarianism. And when a journalist argues for the public's right to know as a reason for violating an individual's privacy, they're also using utilitarianism. Second is the rights approach. Philosophers such as Immanuel Kant believe that the best action is the one that respects and protects the moral rights of those involved. Now, moral rights are open to debate. In media ethics, many people believe moral rights include things like freedom of expression or a right to privacy. This approach is based on the notion that humans have an inherent right to choose how to live their lives, but that they also have a moral duty to respect others in the same way. A third framework is the fairness or justice approach. Aristotle said that equals should be treated equally, and unequals unequally. In other words, what is fair for one should be fair for all. Both favoritism and discrimination are unjust and wrong. That said, treating people equally may not mean treating them the same. For example, a company may hire one candidate over another based on who has more experience and say that is fair. But there is currently a debate over the lack of representation of minorities in newsrooms, Hollywood, and tech, leading many to ask whether the huge disparity is based on a defensible standard or whether it is the result of discrimination and hence is unfair. Moving on, fourth, we have the common good approach. Aristotle and other Greek philosophers also believed that ethical choices should benefit all members of the community. In order for society to flourish, this philosophy holds people must accept modest sacrifices for a common good rather than selfishly protecting their own interests. An example of a common good approach would be providing internet access to everyone, including rural communities, even though it might not be cost-effective and take resources away from city dwellers. This approach directly contrasts a controversial philosophy known as ethical egoism, exemplified by Ayn Rand, who advocated looking out for oneself above all else. The fifth major ethical framework is what's known as virtue ethics. This is a very ancient approach to ethics. It was developed by the Greeks and by Chinese philosopher Confucius. This philosophy assumes that we acquire virtue through practice. By practicing being honest, brave, tolerant, and so on, people develop an honorable and moral character that helps them make the right choice when faced with ethical challenges. Virtue ethics asks of any action, what kind of person will I become if I do this? Or, is this action consistent with my character? For example, a lawmaker might want to block constituents who criticize her on social media, but what kind of public servant would that make her? Shouldn't she listen to her community's concerns? Finally, there is the religion approach. This is another ancient approach, and it is based on the commands of God. Adherents believe that the ethically correct action is the one that God commands or requires. Under this divine command theory, being ethical is equivalent to doing whatever the Bible or the Quran or some other sacred text or source of revelation tells you to do. But this philosophy is premised, of course, on the existence of God, which is not universally accepted, and on the interpretation and application of sacred texts, which believers may disagree over. So, that's a summary of the major ethical frameworks. It's not a complete list, but I think it represents a spectrum of some of the major theories on how to make an ethical decision. Keep in mind that no philosophy is without its problems. We may not agree on what constitutes the common good, for example. We may not even agree on what is good or what is a harm. But all of these frameworks deserve careful consideration and can be applied to many of the controversial issues you may face when dealing with how to behave as a media professional or as a media consumer. I'm not going to argue for one theory or another. Instead, I hope you will think about why you see the world in a certain way, what other perspectives are out there, and what tools will be helpful in guiding your decisions as future professionals in the media, tech, creative arts, or whatever field you're going into. As we explore the law of media, it is also useful to keep these ethical approaches in mind and consider whether the law on a particular media-related issue is right or wrong, and whether it should be changed. Well, this has been a presentation by Professor Grabowski. Thanks for listening.